Hello. In this video we're going to do form sketches, and this comes out from the development cycle that we've had a previous video on, and we're going to use the pseudocode and flowchart video as well in order to get this going. And generally the form sketches come before the pseudocode, but in this case, to kind of make it clear what's going on, I think it actually works a little bit better to go in reverse. Generally, you do this before you actually start planning out the project in terms of design. And design always sounds kind of foreign because we're programmers, we're not designers. But we do need to know some just very basic or have some very basic pieces of understanding for design. To get us started, what I think I'll do is going back to the pseudocode lesson, we created this extremely simple, essentially, program where you're taking input and then you're outputting input. So again, incredibly simple program, but how would you plan this out? And from that, we're going to use a form sketch. So just remember these three simple lines. We're creating an X, putting something into the X, and then displaying that X. And I'm just going to use this mode here to show you how to do it. This is something that's actually done very well via hand. You don't have to get on the computer to do this. Most people prefer to do it that way, but I know there's always some programmers who do not like to draw at all. So if you're one of those people, feel free to just go ahead and grab PowerPoint like we have here. So I'm going to end this show. What I want to do instead is use the actual PowerPoint to draw it using their smart art, essentially. And the first thing you should do is always think about what you're going to be doing this on. So if you're going to be doing it on a PC, you have a range of sizes that you can use. But if you're going to a phone, you have to think about the dimensions of that phone. 480 by 800 is kind of the basic Android. iPhone has a little bit different. The other thing we have to think about, and let's go back to our really simple pseudocode, and then also our really simple flowchart, is that there's not much to it. So we have an input and output. That's all that we're seeing on the screen, right? So how do we keep this simple and user intuitive? As a programmer, you don't want to put a bunch of bells and whistles on something that doesn't need a bunch of bells and whistles. But let's go ahead. So I'm going to just, first of all, I'm going to draw the rough shape of this. And since it's only 3 pieces, you really don't have to think about it in terms of something this large. You might want to do it really just something that big. Because if you think about it, it's almost like a dialog box. So if I do a file save as, see how big this dialog box is? Well, that's because it has to show the folders, it has to show the files, and all this other stuff. You're just taking something from a user and spitting it back out to them. So it's got to be small in this case. Rectangle works well. And then let's go from there. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab the text tool, and I'm just going to say insert word. And actually I'm going to make a box in a box just so PowerPoint doesn't screw it up. So pick your word. And let's bring down the font. It doesn't need to be that. Let's do 12. And stretch this out. And maybe even put a little quote there. So this is essentially just a label, which we'll talk about more when we get into the C#. But that is all that you want out of it. And I am going to also click on this and make it left justified. So it looks like we have a space to put the word in. And then maybe we can do this. We'll take this and put a little box inside a box again. Except what we want to do is format it and color it differently. So I'm going to do is do white. And now we have something that looks like something you'd see on a computer. So we have a blue app with a white input box. And then, next thing to do is let's go ahead and put another one. And I could say something to the effect of, and let's go ahead and do 12 again. The word you chose was that. And I'm going to left justify this and put it at the top. And that's all of our app is going to be. That's all it needs to be. Now you might want to say, okay, let's match these boxes up correctly so that it looks proper. And you might also want to put a button on there. Like let's just say, let's go with this guy. Actually, I take it back. I think what I'll do is a rounded one. And then maybe a submit. So ultimately, what we're going to do is click this submit button, and it's going to take this word and then print it out down here, underneath, either underneath or to the right of this colon. I think as a program, I always kind of think of it as below, just so you can give it a lot more space. Now, does this have to be blue? No, but don't worry about it so much. A lot of form sketches are white just because your goal isn't to design as far as like a graphic designer in terms of color, contrast, that sort of thing. What you want to do is just set up where all the spaces are. And now think about this from a very, very user-centric standpoint, and is that when you enter a word into a form, where is it going to be? Is it going to be at the bottom, or is it going to be at the top? Generally, it's at the top, right? And the output is usually below your input. And then lastly, we tend to read up to down. So a lot of times submit buttons are going to be at the bottom. In some standards, the submit button might be in the top right or the top left. But most cases, or most standards, it's really down here. So that's what we're talking about in terms of designing. We have to make something that where the user knows what to do and where to expect the results. Also, giving them a button to actually force those results is also good. Now, when you take a look at this one, how would you form sketch this out? Why don't you think about that and write it down?